Hey, welcome to another episode of the Flooring 101 podcast. I'm Jason Jabara with Jabara's Carpet Outlet. I've spent the last 25 years in the retail flooring business, the last 10 as CEO. Our business is a single store operation located in Wichita, Kansas, but we are one of the largest independent retailers in the United States. So if you are a retail flooring business and experiencing issues or thinking about getting into the retail flooring business, this is the podcast for you. And as always, it is absolutely free. So tell all of your friends in the flooring industry that you have found a great new podcast called Flooring 101, and they can check it out for themselves. So today we'll be continuing our journey through Flooring 101 and the retail flooring blueprint. Last episode, we talked a little bit about startup costs and capital planning. We were talking about money last time. And today, we'll specifically be discussing a location strategy that drives traffic. That's where to put your business at. So if you stick with us, you'll learn how to start, run, and scale a profitable flooring business through proven systems for sales, operations, and marketing. So let's get into it. A location strategy that drives traffic. We'll be talking about five main points today. That's understanding your target market, visibility versus rent, showroom size considerations, competitor mapping, and lastly, lease negotiation basics. Now, this episode should give you a good idea of what you need to think about in regards to choosing the right location for your business. And at the end, you should be able to answer the question, where will my business be located and why am I locating it there? So that's what we want you to keep in mind as you're listening to this podcast. And at the end of the podcast, please let us know what you liked and what questions you might have. Remember, you can follow us on all of your favorite podcast locations, as well as on Substack, Reddit, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram under the Flooring 101 banners. Plus, if you want to get one-on-one and really dive into bettering your business, you can go to jasonjabara.com and you can book a free call with me. I'd be happy to sit down with you, talk a little bit about your business, and see if I can offer you some additional help and understanding and a way to get your business on track. So let's go ahead and get into it. In the immortal words of Matthew McConaughey, location, location, location. You know, the location of your business, if it's not right, it is just not going to work. It's that simple. You know, a retail flooring business lives or dies by its location. And we're not talking about just the address, but the quality of the demand surrounding where your business is at. And, you know, understanding your target market is the first and most important step. You know, in one of the first podcast episodes, we talked about, you know, building your retail business and what type of business that you wanted to build, you know, whether it was showroom specific or you were going to be a stocking dealer, whether you were going with a large showroom setup or if you were being an independent or buying into a franchise or a buying group. You know, all of those types of things will also have a direct impact on where you're going to locate your business. But, you know, the demographics of the area that you choose to put your business in will tell you who your customers are. But the home values are going to tell you what they can afford, and the remodeling activity tells you how often they're likely to buy. You know, not oftentimes when you're looking at the best location to put your retail flooring business, you're probably not going to be putting it in an area where a lot of new construction is going on and new homes are being built. You're probably not going to be putting it in an area that has a lot of apartment complexes or is a lot of commercial real estate in those areas. You probably want to look in areas with aging homes and property values that are continuing to go up or at least stay steady, and an active real estate turnover. Those type of areas tend to produce a steady flooring demand. So those are the type of demographics you probably want to look at in trying to find a good place that you can nestle your new business into that meets some of those areas. A little bit older homes whose property values are staying solid or at least increasing, and where homes are being sold and people are doing work on those homes. And you can get with a local realtor, a commercial realtor that you trust, who can help you find and define those demographics if you're not super familiar with the city, especially if you're thinking about opening up your own business from scratch and you're not buying into an existing business where you may not have to look for a specific location unless you're buying into a business that you know has to move because it's not in a good location to begin with, and that's why it's struggling. And if you've made that determination, stick with that commercial real estate agent just as you would if you were starting a brand new business from scratch, and try and look at the demographics to match up what you are wanting to have that best matches up with the type of business that you're trying to build. You know, the goal is not to just blindly chase traffic, but to position your store where customers are already investing in their homes. You know, when your location aligns with your customer, the type of customer you're specifically trying to go after, every marketing effort becomes that much more efficient and every lead becomes that much more valuable because you're matching your business up with the location in line with the marketing that you're instilling in those areas, and that makes it more valuable and more efficient. And the question is, you know, when you're looking at the right place to put your business is, do they need my business in this area? And if the answer is no, you still haven't found the location that you're looking for. If the answer is yes, then you can kind of move on, and that's you've found your location. So, you know, once you've identified the right market, the next decision really is balancing the visibility of your business versus the rent that you're going to pay. Now, if you're buying a building outright, and then you're going to buy that building and then, you know, lease that space to your flooring business, that's a great way if you've got the capital money to work it that way, or the business partners involved with it to work it that way. But for those of you that are strictly going to rent or lease your areas, you know, a high traffic retail locations, they offer you a lot of exposure and they offer you a lot of walk-in potential, but they're often going to come with higher costs that can quietly, you know, erode your margins if it's not supported by strong sales performances right off the bat. You know, when we talked about you know, the money that you have on hand and how quickly that can go in the previous podcast, it goes the quickest where you get a building that's too big and costs too much and you can't afford it off the bat. And that's what you're going to get with a lot of the high visibility large buildings that are in really premium locations. And oftentimes, unless they're really established in the area, you're not going to find a lot of flooring businesses in those areas because our margins, you know, that we'll probably talk about in the next podcast, you know, we work off some pretty thin margins in the flooring business. So, you know, I would generally advise to look at secondary locations, and you know, these are going to be less visible, but they can provide a significant financial advantage with a lower overhead and still perform at a high level when you pair them with effective digital marketing and referral systems. You know, typically flooring retailers are not destination locations, and because they're not destination, you know, nobody just drives by a flooring business and goes, oh, I need new flooring, I'll just come in there. You know, most of the time they found you, they've read about you, they've gotten a referral about your business, and they're going to your business, not just driving by it and deciding they need flooring. You know, that works in a lot of things. It generally doesn't work in flooring, and that's why a secondary location is usually more beneficial to you than something in a high visibility area. So as long as you have your marketing system in place and your referral systems in place, that secondary, smaller, a little bit more off the beaten path location is really going to help you save some money and save on your upfront costs. So, you know, the key metric is to evaluate your return on your exposure. How much additional business is the higher rent actually going to generate? And smart operators, smart retailers don't just choose the busiest location, they choose the most profitable one. And that's going to be a combination of where it's located, how much it's costing you, and what kind of referral system and marketing system are you going to have in place for your customer to find it. So just a few things to keep in mind when you're choosing where to put your business. You know, not only is the location super important, but the size of the building is also going to be pretty important. So showroom size is another critical factor that's going to impact, you know, both your customer experience and your financial performance. For most flooring retailers, 1,500 to 3,000 square foot range is kind of the ideal balance between presentation and efficiency. Our showroom and our business is a little bit bigger than that, but we have a little bit different business model than probably somebody who's just starting out in the business. If you're just starting out and you're sticking with that showroom model with maybe a small warehouse space on the back end, 1,500 to 3,000 is probably a great size. You can always grow into a bigger business, but for cost savings and efficiency, that's probably the best area. This size allows you to showcase a curated selection of products without overwhelming the customer or inflating an unnecessary cost. So you don't have to have everything. What you do need to have needs to have a purpose. It should have a specific purpose, and its point would be to highlight and entice your desired customer for the type of customer you're going after and the area that you're in. So, your display space should be designed to guide the buying process, not just simply to showcase inventory or just to have it because a rep said, hey, I'll give you a piece of furniture. You don't need that. You can really do a good job in 1,500 to 2,000 square feet. It's large enough to support your business. And at the same time, you need to make sure that your storage needs are carefully planned out so they can support your operations, but not so much so that it's going to tie up cash in a lot of excess materials that you don't need. So every square foot should serve a purpose in either driving sales or supporting execution. And that smaller footprint of 1,500 to 3,000 square feet should be effective size for you if you're starting off, and certainly allows you to grow into a larger footprint if you find success in your business in the first couple of years. And finally, a strong location strategy should probably include some competitor awareness and some disciplined lease negotiations. We do competitor mapping in our business, and I don't plan on opening another location, but I still map my competitors. So I think competitor mapping helps you understand proximity and positioning. Being near other flooring stores, that they can increase traffic, but only if you have a clear differentiation between your business through either pricing or service or specialization. I know a dealer on the East Coast who has multiple stores, and he tries to get them as close to a floor and decor as possible. He only sells carpeting, and Floor and Decor only sells hard surface. So for him, if he's looking at expanding and looking for a new location for a business, he tries to find someone that doesn't do, they're still in the flooring business, but they don't do what he does. And that allows him to differentiate between his competitors. So, figure out what you do differently, what you're going to do better than the next person, and make sure that you have that in mind if you are getting near, your competitors. So, I have a map of the city of Wichita in my office, and it has the city of Wichita, which is about 350,000 people. The surrounding metro were about 500,000. Goddard, Derby, Andover, Mays, some of the cities that are on the outskirts of Wichita. And I've got, push pins for every retailer in my area. So Menards gets green, and Home Depot gets an orange, and Lowe's gets a blue, and the independent retailers get white pins, and commercial retailers get black pins, so that I know where my competition is at. And it's not necessarily because I'm trying to expand with another business, but it does help me decide where I'm putting some of my marketing dollars and where I'm going to put that energy at based on the location of somebody else. So if you're new to the retail sector and just opening up a business for the first time, knowing where your competitors are at is going to be pretty important to your success, and it's something that you're going to want to make sure that you map out and have an idea of the best place to put your business based on location, age of the customers, property values and things like that. And like I said, I'd make sure that you got a commercial real estate agent to help you out with that process. one of the great things about a commercial real estate agent is they can provide you those demographics for free to help you find a better, the best situation you can. So when you found a location, it's the right size, it's in the right area, it's got the right customers, it's around the right businesses. When you feel pretty confident on it, the last thing you really need to do is look on the financial side and look at your lease terms and make sure that you can still be profitable with those lease terms. Your tenant improvement allowances can help offset build out costs. You're in the flooring business, you've got tile, wood, laminate, vinyl plank, or at least access to those materials, so that can help out on your build out costs. You need to look at rent escalations and make sure that they're structured very carefully to avoid any long-term pressure. Whether you're signing a 3-year or a 5-year lease, or you signing with the option to purchase the property. If you have investment partners, how are they involved? Are there exit clauses that are equally important as your entry clauses? So, providing flexibility if that location underperforms, can you get out of it in a reasonable way, and how can you get out of it? Those are all things that you should be discussing with your commercial real estate agent when you're looking at signing a lease, or if you're purchasing a building outright, whether you're an individual or you've got partners. You want to look at all those considerations before you sign the dotted line, because once you do, then it's go time at that point. So the thing I would keep in mind is that really in a systemized flooring business, location shouldn't be a guess. You shouldn't go, I think a flooring store would work there. You need to know. And you should be able to know if you do all the things that we just talked about, because you're going to be making, at that point, if you follow all these 5 points, you're going to be making a calculated decision that is designed to support your growth and margins and your long-term success. So understand your target market, the demographics, the home values, the remodeling activity in the area. Look at the visibility of your building versus the rent applications. So high traffic retail locations versus a secondary location, and what is the ROI on that exposure? A lot of it based on, do you have the marketing plan in place to implement it in a secondary location? Certainly look at showroom size considerations. I really think that 1,500 to 3,000 square feet is probably your sweet spot. If you can get 2,000 showroom and 1,000-foot warehouse to put everything in as you're receiving materials, that should be sufficient. It allows you the ability to grow. If you're going to go bigger, you might find something where the cost per square foot is extremely inexpensive, but then if it's so inexpensive, are you in the right area? If it's really expensive, are you in the right area? And making sure that you go back and look at those home values and those demographics. 1,500 to 3,000 should allow enough space for the correct display space. If you plan it correctly, it should meet your storage needs. I would certainly do some competitor mapping. Look at the proximity analysis of the others that are in the flooring retail business, and make sure you have a differentiation strategy if you're right next door. And when I mean next door, within 5 to 10 minutes of another competitor, within 5 miles or 3 miles of another competitor, you need to make sure that before you sign the lease that hey, this is what makes me different from the business down the street. This is what I'm going to do better. This is the model that I thought about, when we talked about in a couple of podcasts ago, making sure that you have that differentiation strategy in place, after doing that competitor mapping. And then lastly, just some lease negotiation basics, your TI allowances, your rent escalations, your exit clauses. Make sure that you hire and work with a certified, commercial realtor that can help you find the right business in the right location that meets the needs to make you successful in your business. So those are just 4 or 5 things to keep in mind when you're looking at location. So hopefully this episode gave you a good idea of what you need to think about in regards to choosing the right location, and hopefully at the end of this you're able to answer the question, where will my business be located, and why did I decide to to locate it there? And that why is really important. We can all just pick a spot. I mean, we can look at realtor.com and find places to rent or lease or buy, but you need to know why you're choosing that place and making sure that it meets the right specifications for building the type of model that you've decided to build with your retail flooring business. And if you can't answer that why, then you probably haven't found the right spot yet. So let us know what you liked and what questions you might have about this podcast. So remember, you can follow us on all of your favorite podcast locations like Substack, Reddit, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. They're always going to be under that Flooring 101 banner. If you want to get one-on-one and really dive into bettering your business with me, you can go to jasonjabbar.com and book a call. I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to talk about your business. One of the favorite things that I do is just meet flooring leaders from all across the country and just talk best practices. What makes your mind tick? What are you doing differently than somebody else, and what makes you unique? There's nothing more than I love than talking to other dealers across the country. And if you're somebody who's thinking about opening up a business, I'd love to talk about the type of business that you're thinking about opening and your reasons behind that. And hopefully this podcast allows you to better understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. So we'll see you next time when we discuss margins, markups, and real profit. And until we meet again, continue to build a better business. So Jason Jabbar with Flooring 101 Podcast. I'll talk to you next time.